We see a girl climbing up the stairs. Her legs are wounded and she looks very exhausted. She wonders what could have gone wrong. Leaning against the wall, she continues to climb, asking herself why life has been so cruel to her. Her hands hurt. She looked very exhausted. When she reached the top of the tower, she finally realized the bitter truth. Everyone she loved, even him, all wished for her downfall. The girl stood on the edge of the ledge. If she could go back to that time, she would never fall in love with him. Saying, "Well, that's it." She fell off the ledge, thinking that all she wanted now was eternal rest. The next moment, someone calls out to her, calling her Cecilia. The girl opens her eyes and comes to her senses. A man asks the dear girl if everything is all right. He calls her once more, and we are introduced that it is Cecilia's father, Curtis Lane. The girl can't believe her eyes and calls out to her father. The father asks his sweet daughter if something is wrong. The girl rubbed her eye, answering her father that no, everything is fine. She was in her wedding dress and with a bouquet sitting on the couch. He held out his arms to her and told her it was good to hear, then asked his daughter if it was time for them to go inside. The girl was in her wedding dress, bouquet in hand. She held her father's hand and mentally wondered what was going on. She had definitely fallen off the roof. The girl suggested that it might be a memory before she died. As she looked at her father, she thought about the fact that at least she would be able to see her father one last time like this before she left. It would be the last gift for her miserable life, she thought. Suddenly, she pulled herself back, and looking at the dress, she realized that it looked very familiar. Someone announced that the bride should be greeted, whereupon the whole room applauded. The bride and her father walked up the aisle. The groom, who was already standing at the altar, stared at her. The girl was puzzled when she saw him and mentally saying his name, Ethan. She wondered how it was. She was horrified when she saw him. The girl trembled, and her father immediately noticed it and called her name. The girl realized that this was not a dream or a memory, but the very real reality. The girl, one of the guests, mentally asked if the bride was worried. The father wondered aloud to his daughter what was wrong. The girl shook like that, stammered, and answered her father that it was nothing. When Ethan looked at her, she looked away. The priest began to speak, addressing the Lord that they were gathered here to seal the holy matrimony of his children. He spoke the names of the soon-to-be married couple Ethan Robin Burnett, second prince of the Wyatt Empire, and Cecilia Lane, only daughter of Duke Lane. She thought about the fact that she vividly remembered the moment when she jumped off that tower, but everything that was happening now seemed too real. She wondered if she had traveled back in time, if that was even possible. But even if it was, why she had come back at that moment. The priest continued that they were here to witness the vows that would unite them in marriage. Here the girl was taken aback by the thought that crossed her mind that maybe she should just run away. But if she did that, then what then? Where would she go? The priest raised his hand and said that now, with the power given to him by God, he was pronouncing them husband and wife. Ethan was radiant at this moment, but Cecilia was clearly mortified. The priest announced that the husband could now kiss the bride. Ethan brushed a strand of hair away from his wife's face and asked her to be patient, for it would soon be over. She added that Cecilia was really beautiful. Ethan kissed the girl, who was in turn completely shocked. The hall began to applaud. The girl said that when they got married, she realized that God had intertwined their destinies again. She realized that she was once again doomed to this fate. Night falls. The next moment, someone addresses Her Highness, saying that she is glad to finally meet her. It is a maid who tells Cecilia that she can call her Lauren. Cecilia replied that it was fine and spelled the name Lauren. The girl remarked that the maid had said, "Finally meet you." Lauren complimented that Her Highness must be tired after the wedding, so she prepared a bath for her. Cecilia replied that was fine and said she would like to be left alone. Lauren finally replied that, of course, and told Her Highness to get a maid if she needed one. Cecilia sat in the bathtub with flower petals. It tells us that Emperor Wyatt had 3 sons. The first prince, heir to the throne, died by accident, and the youngest son who was poisoned by the eldest. Since he was the son of his second wife, the emperor loved him the least. And then the emperor was left with one son. Eventually, Ethan, the second prince, was elevated to the throne, and naturally Cecilia became empress. You could say that a bloody crown was placed on Ethan's head. And then her life went downhill. She picked up the flower petals in the bathtub with her hand. She never dreamed that he, Ethan Robana Wyatt, the love of her life, literally destroyed her. Cecilia's life was shattered when Ethan became emperor. He falsely accused her father and had him executed. Although Ethan himself was constantly nice to everyone, and it was no secret he was nice to everyone but her. Sitting in the bathtub, the girl began to immerse herself in the water. She had seen him cry the day his father passed away and thought it wasn't fake. This was the Ethan Robana Wyatt everyone knew. At least she thought so. In the next moment, we see the trial. Count Oliver Nova goes to Cecilia's father and tells him that people on his lands are dying because of exploitation. Cecilia's father was puzzled by what was happening. He put his hand sharply on the table and said that this was nonsense and there was no exploitation in his territory. She did not understand why this was happening. He asked her to tell His Majesty that he was innocent. In the next moment, Cecilia sits on her knees on the floor next to Ethan and declares that she's the one who says he's got it all wrong. Her father didn't do it. She asks why he is doing this to her family. Ethan calmly asked the girl if she really believed her father was innocent. After all, if he was, why did he keep running away? Cecilia was dumbfounded and trembling, answered that it was because Ethan had ordered his execution. The emperor, however, replied that he was already on the run at the time. Curtis Lane, Cecilia's father, must pay for his actions. Ethan stated that whatever Cecilia said, he wouldn't change his mind. The girl replied that okay, and she understood him, no matter if it was her father's fault. But she's also Lane, then she also deserves to be executed. She started asking him to kill her. She asked why he didn't touch her. Sobbing, the girl screamed for him to just kill her. Ethan looked at the girl with empty eyes and sat down on one knee in front of her, saying that he wanted to kill her. The girl was dumbfounded by his words. He put his hand on her cheek. Cecilia at that moment asked him what he had just said. Ethan added that she had to live. His face was emotionless, and he said that Cecilia should live. After that, he stood up and turned around to leave. The girl mentally wondered if he would leave her like that. She remembered the moment when they had been happy. She didn't understand what had happened to the sweet and kind Ethan she knew. In the next moment, Mrs. Casper is asked how she could have done such a thing. Countess Chamberlain Maria Casper replied that honor and money are necessary for a noble family like them, but right now the girl has neither. Cecilia asked how she could betray her trust. The Countess took a step toward the girl, stating that things were very bad. Suddenly, there was another girl in the room, Elena Nova, Cecilia's maid. She was wearing a brooch, which the Empress noticed at once and realized that she had given it to Ethan. Cecilia was trembling all over, and Elena mockingly called her a poor girl and said she must have been frightened. The Empress could not believe how her maid could do such a thing. Grinning, Elena replied so the girl wouldn't take it personally. She was just back where she belonged. She shared with Cecilia that her father would be executed within 3 days in the palace square, where everyone would be watching. Elena is sure the Empress will be there to see her father's execution as well. Elena's words horrified the Empress. She was shocked at what she had heard. Cecilia summarized that everyone only wished for her downfall. Dipping her head into the water, she concluded that she would rather die than relive it again. And at that moment, she heard a quiet voice from inside. Someone asked why. Why does the girl alone have to die? Why is she the only one who suffers? It's not like she did anything wrong. All this pain, sadness, and despair, it's all because of him. Obviously, somehow she has gone back in time. She declared that she would never, ever love Ethan, but she realized that she didn't want that to be her only wish. Maybe this all happened for a reason. Maybe it was all the work of God, and she'd been given a second chance to tear his heart out this time, or ruin everything he has altogether. In the next moment, Ethan sips wine from a glass, telling the girl that it's been a hard day and asking Cecilia if she wants to have some wine. The girl quietly thanked His Highness, but declined. Ethan noticed that she must be tired, but she said she was fine. Lowering his head, he noted that her legs looked swollen, then asked if he could give her a massage. The girl's face looked saddened. The next moment, Cecilia nervously and embarrassedly told His Majesty that he really shouldn't do it. Ethan replied that he was just worried because the girl had been in heels all day. His Highness massaged his wife's foot with both hands. He smiled and asked if the girl was shy, then laughed. Cecilia embarrassedly said that of course she was shy because her feet were dirty. Ethan, glowing with happiness, replied that it was all right because they still looked nice to him. The girl blushed, and the Emperor replied that they were already married, so she should not be embarrassed. Ethan continued to massage her foot and noticed that she had a blister and her toes were all red. Cecilia asked him seriously if he thought her feet were dirty. Ethan smilingly raised his head and answered that they were not dirty at all, but on the contrary, they were small and cute. The girl looked saddened. The next moment, the guys wanted to kiss, but Cecilia remembered how Ethan had told her in a past life that he wanted to kill her. The girl stopped and put her hands on his chest, and then pushed him away slightly. She turned to His Majesty, saying that she knew he had no feelings for her and probably never would, so she wouldn't say it didn't hurt. Ethan remained silent, and the girl continued and stated that they couldn't until she was sure he had feelings for her. She added that all she was asking for was a little time to get used to it. Mentally, she thought about how the Ethan she knows would never do something forcibly. They are both well aware that this is a marriage of convenience. Ethan looked at the girl silently at first, and then sat down next to her and answered that he understood everything and didn't want to rush the girl, so he would lie down on the couch now. The girl grabbed him by his robe when he started to get up from the bed, saying that the couch was uncomfortable and he could sleep next to her. Ethan was pleased by this, and a smile lit up his face. The next moment, they were lying next to each other and wished each other good dreams. The next morning, Cecilia woke up early and looked at Ethan sleeping and wondered what would happen if she killed him now and just prevented the terrible things he would do. For he would just turn his back on her and her father, and the girl herself would end up committing suicide. But Cecilia immediately stopped herself, realizing that Ethan shouldn't die so easily, and she wanted him to suffer. If she does, things will be different. In the next moment, we see her flashback when the couple is approached by a young man who tells the couple that the two of them look a lot like a couple in love. Ethan calls out to a man named Astor, but almost immediately corrects himself by addressing him as His Highness. Astor tells Cecilia, "Welcome to their family. She is no longer Lane and is now Duchess Burnett." The boy smiles brightly at the girl. This is Astor Robana Wyatt, the first prince, Ethan's older brother and heir to the throne. He died during the war that started on the southern island of Lemaire, because that island had an abundance of gold. If he hadn't died like that, Ethan wouldn't have ascended to the throne and ruined her family. She also remembered the moment in the cemetery as they stood at Astor's grave. Cecilia realized that sooner or later Astor would have died anyway, but she wondered what would happen if she couldn't be tricked this time. She realized she had to stop the war and win Astor over to her side. Then Countess Casper and the Nova family would pay for everything. When she lost everything she held dear and was literally left alone. Now she would be there to tear him apart, just like he had done to her. She pictured a sitting and stunned Ethan, her husband. In a real moment, Ethan rolled over onto his back and opened his eyes to see Cecilia sitting on the bed. He cupped his chin with one hand and took stock of the fact that Cecilia was awake so early. The girl pressed her lips together. She realized that in order to see his last day, the girl smiled and glowed and wished good morning to His Highness. She would enjoy smiling, looking him straight in the eyes. In the next moment, we see a mountain of present. Someone announces that the whole mountain is gifts from His Highness Prince Astor for Duchess Burnett. The prince also asked them to tell him if they needed anything. Ethan and Cecilia were a little embarrassed by so many gifts. They looked at this mountain of sparkling gifts. The girl realized that she remembered him doing the same thing in a past life, and she still thought it was amazing. Ethan at that moment started unpacking and examining the presents. Noticing a small gift and unwrapping it, she saw a set of brooches that reminded her very much of her and Ethan's eyes. Looking at them sadly, she remembered that they were her favorite. The girl clenched her hand into a fist and declared that she liked everything very much, and she asked to thank Prince Aster for her. Ethan asked the prince's man if he should stay for tea, but the man thanked them and said he had to go. The man is Marquis Caliber, Ethan's brother-in-law and Prince Aster's aide. Cecilia mentally talks about him supporting Ethan to be closer to the heir in the event of Aster's death. Cecilia seriously wondered if he would be at Ethan's side if Aster didn't die. Already out loud, the girl said that she was inviting the Marquise of Caliber to visit them, perhaps to have her and Macrise visit them next time. The Marquise smilingly replied that they were worthy of their Highness's honor. Cecilia glanced embarrassedly at Ethan, saying not to remind Marquis of that. After all, she had just wanted to spend time together for a long time. The couple's hands touched. Ethan blushed slightly and looked at Cecilia and smiled. Cecilia also smiled back at him. The next moment, we see Cecilia sitting alone on the couch. She is sitting in front of a small table on which is a kettle with cups of tea. Someone announces to Her Highness that Mrs. Monty and Lady Abby have arrived. Her Highness tells them to come in. Mrs. Monte is Cecilia's nanny and Abby is her daughter. Abby, opening her arms, flew to Cecilia, calling her Miss, which angered her mother, and she, with a dejected hand on her forehead, said that Abby should address Cecilia as Your Highness. The girl immediately apologized. Lauren bowed and said she would sort it out herself. But she remembered something else and gave Cecilia the list of maids, asking her to choose a few, and Lauren would approve them. The girl wondered if she could choose the same people she had in her previous life. But she stopped immediately and turned to Lauren. She asked the girl if any of these maids might be from the Southern Islands, or know the locals. The maid hesitated and clarified about the Southern Islands and said she would look it up. Cecilia smiled and thanked her and handed her the list back to her. Lauren then left, closing the door behind her. The girls began to drink tea. Cecilia asked Mrs. Monty how her father was feeling. Mrs. Monty replied that he was as usual, except that he had been talking to Count Nova about marriage. The girl inquired if Count Nova had brought up the subject again. The nurse replied dejectedly that he had, for Cecilia herself knew how curious Count Nova could be. Abby remarked that it was accurate and nodded her head confidently. Miss Monty added that of course Cecilia's father had refused. The girl realized that Count Nova was trying to destroy her family. Her face became stony, emotionless. She knows what he is here for and what he wants, to take over her father and family. Cecilia turned to Abby and said that she was going to write a letter as she had to meet someone. Abby curiously inquired as to who, to which she received a reply from Cecilia that it was the head merchant. Abby immediately replied that if the girl needed to buy something, she could do it for her. However, Cecilia replied that he was an ordinary merchant. They were just acquaintances, but she would like to cooperate with him. At that moment, the girl was writing a letter with a quill pen on a piece of paper. When Cecilia had written the letter and folded it, she asked Abby to take the letter to the nearest pawn shop, after which she placed the letter in the girl's hands. Abby glowingly replied that she admired Miss Cecilia more and more. Her mother again grimaced, saying that Cecilia was no longer Miss, but Her Highness, and added that her daughter should stop talking and begin to work. Cecilia mentally noted that it didn't matter how they met the merchant. What mattered was that when it came to Mrs. Monty and Abby, she could rely on them. Suddenly, a glowering Ethan appears in the room where the three ladies are and addresses Cecilia by name. Abby is amazed at the appearance of His Highness and begins to glow. Ethan apologizes to Mrs. Monty and Abby, but they, in turn, smilingly bow and, having understood everything, said that, of course. After they leave, the couple is left alone. Cecilia shared with Ethan that she thought he had already left and asked him if he wanted something. Ethan replied that he wanted to ask the girl if she wanted to go with him to his brother's house to thank him for the gifts. Cecilia replied that of course she wanted to, since it had been a long time since they had seen His Highness. Ethan remarked that he was sure Aster was waiting to meet him, then laughed lightly. Something caught his eye and Ethan turned to Cecilia and said that the girl didn't look well and asked her if she was okay. Cecilia froze and after a bit of thought, shared with a sad face that Count Nova had asked her father to marry again. She knows her father trusts the Count, but why is he suggesting this so soon after his daughter's wedding? Ethan thought at that moment that Cecilia's father wasn't interested in marriage or benefits, and it was time for Count Nova to realize that. Ethan put his hand on the girl's shoulder and asked her if Count Nova had recommended a family he knew, whereupon he remarked that in that case he agreed with the girl that his intentions might be impure. The girl recoiled from Ethan, telling His Highness that it didn't matter, and he was even going to go. Smiling, Ethan replied that everything the girl said was important to him. Then he suggested that they have lunch together when he got there. Cecilia waved His Highness away, agreeing to his suggestion, but she began to slowly lower her hand and gloomily repeated his phrase that everything she said was important to him. The girl's face became stony and emotionless. She'd picked up on the fact that in his past life, he didn't care what she thought or said. The next moment we find ourselves in the royal palace. The third prince, Damon Robana Wyatt, walks down the corridor with a quick and menacing stride. He opens the door abruptly, and then finds himself in a room where his father and older brother, Prince Astor, are sitting. Walking to the table, he addresses his father, but immediately misfires, addressing the Emperor as His Majesty and saying that he wants to ask him a favor. But his father grimaced and indignantly, covering his face with his hand, replied that he had told Damon to address him formally. "This is Emperor Wyatt, Liam Woods Wyatt." Damon immediately replied indignantly and angrily that Astor had never done such a thing to meet the Emperor. The Emperor replied seriously to Damon to tone it down, for they both must put themselves in the shoes of the heir. Astor began to rise from his seat, telling His Majesty that he would wait for him outside. As he left, Astor put his hand on Damon's shoulder and told him to have her talk to her father, and next time he should definitely call his father formally. Damon was obviously very annoyed. He clenched his jaw at Astor's words, but thanked him for his advice as he headed for the door. Astor left the room and leaned back against the closed door, exhaling heavily and thinking about Damon. He realized that his younger brother had the same temper as his father. Covering his eyes, he didn't notice someone approaching, and suddenly someone addressed His Highness. It was Empress Tiffany Oberon Wyatt, who said she was looking for her son, Damon. Astor immediately turned to Her Highness, saying that her son, Damon, was talking to the Emperor. The Empress inquired what Astor and the Emperor had talked about before. Astor was surprised by her question, but immediately shared that he had simply informed the Emperor that Ethan and the Duchess were to visit them. The Empress immediately thought about it, noting that it seemed that it was something the newlyweds should do. Suddenly she asked Astor cryptically if he thought Ethan and Cecilia were happy together. Astor was clearly uncomfortable with the question, and he answered aloud, "I guess so," though he wondered why the Empress was suddenly asking about it. The Empress smiled sweetly, noting herself that it was a strange question, then shared that she was just worried about them not having a child. She didn't want to pry at all, just worried, and apologized to him. Astor apologized for making them worry. The Empress stated that she was sure that the Duchess was a great match for Ethan, but she also shared with Astor that there were supplements that helped with getting pregnant. She wished Astor would get them. Astor clenched his hand into a fist at the Empress's words and bowed, thanking Her Majesty for her kindness. Astor exhaled heavily and nervously, thinking about the fact that he hadn't seen Ethan since the wedding. He wondered what his brother was doing. Meanwhile, in his room, Ethan was sitting at his desk with a young boy, his assistant, standing next to him. The aide shared that he didn't think it was necessary to remodel the Dritten house. This young man is Ethan's personal assistant, Enan Carlton. Enan noticed something and looked more closely at Ethan, then asked His Highness if he cared about anything. Ethan asked Enan what Count Nova was like. The aide asked if he meant as a servant of Duke Lane. He added that his family had served the Lane family for more than 4 generations, and with great loyalty. They had a close relationship, and he had heard that Count Nova had introduced the Duke to the late Duchess. Enan said this very cheerfully. Ethan shared that Count Nova is proposing that the Duke remarry right after he and Cecilia get married, so His Highness isn't sure if his intentions are pure. Enan shared that this is usually what a loyal servant would do, since the daughter who was mistress of the house left and married. Ethan asked if Count Nova had recommended someone he knew. Enan thought about it and answered, "Well, that could be the case." Ethan asked him to find out more about the Count. The aide replied to His Highness that of course, if it bothered His Highness. Ethan replied, "No, it's just that now that he and Cecilia are married, her problems are his problems." She still couldn't get used to the fact that they were married, but it wasn't that bad, Ethan thought, remembering a happy Cecilia. In the next moment, we see a man walk up to the door and knock on it. When he is told that he may enter, James Morak, the chief merchant of Maxtra, appears in the ajar doorway and states that he is here to see the Duchess and has come at her request. Cecilia, sitting in a chair, remarks that, "Oh, he must be James Morak," and asks him to take a seat. He plopped down on the sofa opposite the Duchess, spreading his legs, and wondered what she, such a noble lady, needed from a guy like him. The merchant was nervous and noticed that the girl was using his secret to her advantage. He remembered that when the letter had been handed to him, the girl had said it was from a very important person, and he had grinned in return and wondered how important. The letter addressed him as James Morak, or Diego, the chief merchant of Maxtra. The girl has an offer for him, so she invites him to come to the palace to meet the Duchess. And if he doesn't come, people will know about his past. These lines horrified and made the head merchant nervous. He wondered if she knew, but how on earth would she know? However, he understood perfectly and scolded to himself and realized he had no choice. The merchant told the Duchess that she could call him what she liked and wondered what the business was. Cecilia remarked that he was more impatient than she had thought. She also remarked that she hoped he realized that it was very serious. Abruptly placing the cup on the table, Cecilia calmly stated that she wanted information from him and added that he knew he could not refuse her. The merchant was clearly mortified and mentally wondered where he would go if she knew his secrets. Already aloud, leaning on his lap, James replied to the Duchess that since she knew about his past, she must have a very good snitch. Cecilia confidently stated that it was all for her, but she thought no one worked better than him. The merchant mentally mused that she had the right idea, since he was the best. With his foot on his leg, James wondered what good the offer would do him. He added mentally that nothing comes for free. Cecilia replied confidently that she could promise that his past would never come up. The cup hovered in the merchant's hand. Cecilia smiled and asked him to answer as much as he could find out. The merchant thought about the fact that this could be a great deal, though not an easy one. He'd probably risk his life agreeing to this deal, but he had no choice now. He pictured himself tiny, sitting in the palm of the Duchess's hand. He is now under her control. The merchant said he would be frank with her. The entrance to the Emperor's chambers is closed. He continued that it wasn't that. It was a matter of life or death, so he could find out anything she wanted for a price. The girl smirked upon hearing his words. Smiling, Cecilia replied that well, and she also promised that in the future the merchant would speak his name with pride. James replied that he understood and asked the girl what kind of information she wanted. Cecilia immediately replied that she wanted to know everything about Count Nova, including his children and servants. She needed to know what he was hiding behind the mask of a loyal servant. She said this with an emotionless and stony face. She wants to know everything. The Duchess summarized that the merchant needed to know everything about Count Nova. She remembered that he already had these documents against her father in his previous life, meaning he had started working on it before her wedding, but it certainly wasn't done quickly. This time he wouldn't be able to do it the way he wanted. She asked how much time he needed. A month, perhaps. James replied that he needed a lot more. He then asked if he would be tested. Smiling, he replied that he would let her know within 2 weeks, and if the girl liked his work, they could sign a contract. He also asked her what she would say to that. Cecilia replied that it was good, and that she trusted the merchant. James stood up and bowing, asked her permission, and going out the door, told her see you later. After he left, when the girl was alone, she clutched the hem of her dress, thinking about the fact that she was paying people for dirty work. In the end, she became someone she hated. But she realized she couldn't stop, So she mentally encouraged herself to stay strong, like old Ethan, who only wished for her death. In the next moment, we see the carriage stop, and the coachman tell His Highness that they have arrived. Ethan thanks him and gets out of the carriage. Heading towards the gate, he talked about how good it was that he was done for dinner. Suddenly, he saw a man running by the gate. Ethan didn't realize who the men were and stared in his wake. The next moment, we see Cecilia and Ethan sitting at the table. Ethan says that it is great and he is glad they are having dinner together. Cecilia replied to His Highness that she was pleased, too. Ethan took a glass of wine in his hand and asked his wife Cecilia cheerfully if she did not drink. The girl answered that not really, she sometimes drinks. She just worries that she will do something stupid after she drinks. Ethan immediately asked another question, wondering if she wouldn't have even one sip. Cecilia answered that it was a small thing, not worth His Highness's attention. He, in turn, said that he just wanted to know more about her. Cecilia said nothing to him and continued chewing her food. The girl thought about the fact that he is always kind to her, even though he doesn't want to be, but that's why he always managed to control her. And that's why she hates him even more. She feels cheated. He was never there for her when she needed him most. But Cecilia immediately realized that she couldn't show her true feelings as it was too early. She smiled forcibly and replied to His Highness that it was very nice of him, and she was generally very happy. The next moment, we see Cecilia sitting up in her bed after waking up, and the new maid, who wished her good morning, addressing her as Her Highness and bowing. The maid added that it was an honor to serve the Duchess and introduced herself as Alice. Cecilia replied to the girl that it was a pleasure to meet her, and she asked that she had heard that the girl was from Rainer Island. The Duchess substituted that it was such a beautiful day and asked if Alice's hometown was also nice. Alice was surprised by her words, but answered that it was very beautiful and sunny all year round in her hometown, with clean water and beautiful nature. Cecilia remarked that it seems to be a very good place for tourists. At that moment, Alice began wiping the Duchess's face with a wet towel. Cecilia covered her eyes in bliss. She was clearly enjoying the towel wiping her face. Alice shared that the town was actually far from the capital, and they had been having problems lately, so there weren't many tourists. Cecilia immediately wondered what the problems were. Alice continued that since the island is located in the center of the Vanian Sea, they have been in conflict for a long time. Therefore, she thinks that it scares away tourists. Cecilia, meanwhile, mentally thought about how she hoped that the Vania hadn't found out about the gold mine there yet. Already in her hearing, she asked what the fight there was about. Alice shared that most of the islanders make their living by fishing, but lately, the Vanian Navy has been guarding the sea, and they are ready to attack the people of the island, ordinary fishermen, if they cross their sea border. It's very hard to live on the island without fishing, so there's no place for a tourist right now. When she finished speaking, Alice exhaled sadly and grabbed her elbow out of embarrassment. Cecilia mentally shares with us that basically Vanya is mad at the Rainer Islands. So why doesn't anyone know about it? It's just that the Wyatt imperial family is very indifferent. Anyway, this is a great moment for her since no one knows about the gold mines yet. Cecilia queried to Alice that she must be very worried about her family. She added that she was very moved by the story, so she would think about how she could help. Alice was struck by Her Highness's words. Suddenly, someone knocked on the Duchess's chambers, and Mrs. Monty appeared in the doorway, telling Her Highness it was her. In the woman's hands was a tray. Cecilia told her to come in. Alice said she would go and left the room. As Mrs. Monty watched her, she noticed that she was new, but she was clearly a good girl. Mrs. told the Duchess that these were her pills and handed her a tray of pills and a glass of water. The girl thanked her. Cecilia took the pills, and Mrs. Monty remembered something and informed the girl that a letter had been sent to Her Highness. The girl took the letter and thanked the woman. Cecilia was surprised that the letter was from Diego, for 2 weeks had not passed, but she wondered very much what he had learned. In the letter, he wrote that this was all he had been able to find out about Count Nova in that time. Cecilia noticed that he started without a greeting and got straight to the point, which was definitely something she liked. In the letter, The merchant wrote that the Count was banning people from the grounds and buying unknown items at strange auctions. The merchant had been keeping an eye on Count Nova. He also noticed that no one could get into the Count's office except his daughter, Alina Nova. And she is often seen entering his office. But since Alina Nova manages the palace budget, she has a good reason to enter his office. Perhaps she is learning to work from her father. James continued that perhaps the Duchess herself already knew that the girl, Count Nova's daughter, had been recommended as Duke Lane's new wife. Cecilia remarked that it annoyed her so much. She sighed and turned to Mrs. Monty and said she wanted to write a letter, and then asked if Mrs. Monty could send it. The woman immediately asked to whom she was sending it. Cecilia took her hand away from her face and smilingly replied that it would be a letter for Count Nova and his daughter Alina. She wants to thank them for their loyalty. She also wants Alina to work for her because the Duchess knows that the girl is very smart, so she has a lot to learn from her. The girl rose from the bed. Mrs. Monte remarked that this is so kind of the Duchess. The Nova family should be very grateful. The girl sweetly replied that they were not, for it was the least she could do for them. She went to the coat rack and asked Mrs. Monty to help her get dressed, as she had a lot to do today. The woman apologized and said she would get her outfit ready right away. The next moment, we see a go-kart driving down a busy street with Ethan and Cecilia in it. They are sitting across from each other. Ethan suddenly asked Cecilia if the girl was worried. He remembered that when they had first met the Emperor, she had cried. The girl awkwardly remarked that His Highness had a good memory, because she could hardly remember their first meeting. He added that he remembered she was 10 years old and she was wearing a yellow dress. She was just like a butterfly, and he held her hand so she wouldn't fall. He encouraged her not to be afraid they wouldn't stay long. The girl replied that it was okay. She was a duchess now, after all. Ethan replied that of course everything would be fine. Cecilia remembered something and told Ethan that she wanted to hire Count Nova's daughter as her assistant. Ethan froze when he heard that and asked about Count Nova's daughter. Cecilia remarked that they were very loyal to their family, and she wanted to show her gratitude. Ethan replied that he understood, and if the girl wanted, but he didn't have time to finish. The cart stopped, and they realized they had arrived. As they got out of the carriage, Cecilia looked at the huge door of the palace and thought about how she never wanted to come back here, for this place had completely ruined her life. Her face was frowning and serious. Ethan looked at the girl and took her hand the next moment, asking where his confident Duchess was. The girl was embarrassed and replied that she was still a little worried, but mentally, she asked herself not to be distracted, for he would not protect her. She confidently declared that this time she would not let anyone ruin her life, and then Ethan and Cecilia entered the palace. Upon entering the palace, Ethan immediately greeted the Emperor and Empress. In the palace, the Emperor and Empress were already waiting for the guests, and were happy when they saw that they were already here. The Emperor told Cecilia that they were welcome. He paused, noting that the girl was already a duchess, and she had grown so much since their first meeting. She had become a beautiful girl. Cecilia smiled and replied to His Majesty that he was very nice. The Emperor approached the couple and patted his son Ethan on the shoulder, saying that he looked great, after which he asked his son if he was enjoying his life as a newlywed. Ethan replied that even very much, and he is ready to spend eternity with his wife Cecilia. After saying that, he smiled and looked at his wife, and she looked on, smiling back at him. Someone asked only to look at them. Ethan bowed to his brother Aster, greeting His Highness. Aster replied that he was pleased to see them as well. The Empress asked seriously and coldly, just why call the newlyweds here and disturb them? The Emperor asked his wife indignantly what she was talking about, for she herself had said that this was a common thing for newlyweds. He immediately asked her indignantly if she objected to his decision. The girl standing next to the Emperor, Princess Isabella, remarked that she was sure they wanted to meet in person. The princess then asked the Duchess if that was true. Cecilia remembered that she had not heard of the girl in her previous life after Aster's death, and she remarked that she was still gorgeous. The Duchess herself nodded slightly at the princess's question. The Emperor replied that it was possible. It was just that all he wanted now was for Damon to get married. The youngest son stood behind him with an angry face. The emperor continued that it was just so hard to plan. Damon was shaking with anger and irritably asked why Aster and Ethan were married to girls from prestigious families, and he should marry the Viscount's daughter. Next, he was already shouting to his father, asking him what could be planned for such a useless alliance. The emperor said his youngest son's name indignantly. Damon continued to shout, asking if he was wrong. The empress took her son's hand, telling him to stop. After Damon fell silent, the empress remarked that her son was still a child, but she would talk to him, after which she apologized to the Duchess for that. Cecilia in turn replied to Her Majesty that it was fine. The empress, along with her angry son Damon, turned around and strode away from the company. The emperor was also annoyed. They gritted their teeth and said that the empress was too soft on Damanoi, and he sincerely didn't understand why. Aster turned to His Majesty, saying that Damanoi was not entirely wrong. The girl he is to marry is really just the Viscount's daughter, and his younger brother doesn't think she is quite good enough for him. The emperor retorted that Damon should know his place. Aster wanted to object, but the emperor reminded him that he was the heir. Those words stopped the heir. The emperor prolonged that he understood that the eldest son felt bad for Damon, but he needed to stop anyone from ruling over him, even if it was his own family. Cecilia thought from what she heard that maybe Ethan was so cruel to her, because he had been raised in such conditions. When he did that to her, he thought he was doing the right thing. Cecilia realized that she felt strange about all of this. In the next moment, we see the company of Ethan and Cecilia, as well as Prince Aster and Princess Isabella. Aster apologized to the Duchess, saying that Damon is still a child. Smiling, Cecilia replied that the truth was fine. Someone pointed out that Princess Isabella wasn't looking her best. As Aster approached her, he turned to his wife and asked her why she didn't tell her that she wasn't feeling well. The princess replied that she just wanted to see everyone off. Aster told her to go and get some rest, since he was sure no one would mind. Cecilia supported Aster, telling Her Highness that yes, she should go rest. Isabella waved, thanking Ethan and Cecilia, saying that they would meet again. Cecilia remembered that she had a couple of gifts for the princess as a thank you. Aster replied that the girl was so kind and thanked her. Cecilia replied that there was nothing to thank her for, and suddenly the girl added that she would like to ask Aster for a favor. Ethan was obviously surprised to hear his wife's words. Aster was also a little surprised to hear about the favor. The girl smirked and asked if the prince knew about the island Rainer near the southern border. Aster replied that he did, and in return asked how the girl knew about him. Cecilia shared that her new assistant told her about him. She is a very nice girl. This assistant came to leave the island because of the conflict with Vanya. Cecilia can't help in any way, so she asks the prince for help. Aster replied that he was impressed with her kindness and understanding. Putting his hand on his brother's shoulder, he remarked that his brother had a great wife. Ethan thanked him. Aster told the girl that he understood her and he would do his best. As heir, he couldn't ignore an issue that needed attention. Cecily thanked the prince, but Aster also thanked her in return for such valuable information. Aster added that it was getting late and he should see them off. Ethan remarked that the time had flown by so quickly and they would be sure to visit again. Putting his hand on Ethan's shoulder, Aster asked if his brother imagined how happy their father would be if he and the Duchess had a son. Ethan stopped and simply addressed His Highness. Aster was embarrassed and apologized, apologizing without thinking. Ethan replied that he was sure the princess would soon recover and he and the prince would have a child. Isabella just needed to be well taken care of. Aster smiled and replied that his brother was right. He should take care of his wife too. Leaving, Ethan shared with Cecilia that the day had been hard and his wife must be so tired. The girl replied that no, she was fine. Suddenly someone called out to their highness, whereupon they turned around. It was a maid who had a red envelope in her hands. She said that she had a letter for them. She handed the envelope to Cecilia. When the girl took the envelope, she knew at once that it was from the Empress. The maid added that she had been told to deliver it to her, Her Highness. Cecily was surprised that the letter was from the Empress, whom she had never even spoken to in person. The next moment we see the carriage coming back. Ethan and Cecilia did not sit across from each other, but next to each other. Ethan asked the girl if she wanted to lean against his shoulder. The girl immediately began to drop her head on his shoulder, thinking that she had no reason to refuse. Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder at that moment. Suddenly, he asked his wife if she really wanted the prince to solve the problem with the island. Cecilia replied that not really, because she would be working too. For now, she just wanted to do research on the island. Right now, she can't go there, but she will try to read articles or books. Ethan stated that if that was the case, he would ask Enon to help her. Cecilia thanked His Highness, because Alice is really a good girl and that's why she wants to help. Suddenly, the carriage stops abruptly. The carriage begins to shake. Cecilia assumes that the road is uneven. In the next moment, from the jolt, she begins to fall, but Ethan shouts her name and catches her. The girl remained seated, thanks to the fact that Ethan was holding her up, hovering over her at that moment. The girl is clearly uncomfortable. Ethan immediately asks her if she's in pain. Abruptly, the carriage door opens and the coachman asks their highness if everything is all right. The couple is clearly taken aback by his abrupt appearance. Cecilia replies that she is fine and asks Ethan to let her go. Ethan apologized, saying that he just wanted to help. Standing next to the carriage, the coachman shared that the road was so muddy because of the heavy rain last night, but help was on the way, so they should wait, even though they didn't have long to wait. Ethan said he would take care of her until the end. Cecilia interjected what he meant, then added she was adamantly against it. Ethan cheerfully wondered how it was even possible to walk through mud in heels. Still, he held out his hand to her, telling her to let them go. Ethan carried the girl on his back, telling her that she might be embarrassed, but they didn't have long to go. Though it was a good opportunity for him to show himself as a good husband, after which Ethan laughed lightly. Cecilia wondered if it was because of what the prince had said about the baby. Ethan, however, replied that no, it didn't matter. His Highness shared that he just wanted to make her happy. The girl replied that it wasn't healthy. Ethan didn't immediately understand her. Cecilia added that trying to be good all the time could be harmful. Ethan remained silent. The girl looked saddened. Ethan glanced at her briefly, then continued to look ahead. The next moment, we see that they are already approaching the gate to their home. As darkness fell, Anne and Ethan came into His Highness Ethan's room. Ethan was getting ready for bed. However, he almost immediately asked Ethan how Cecilia was, and he in turn replied that the girl had fallen asleep because she was probably tired. Ethan shared that they had an incident on the ride home. Enon smilingly shared that their carriage was fine now. Ethan remembered something else and held out a red letter to His Highness, saying that the coachman had found it in the carriage. Ethan realized at once that it was that letter from the Empress. He said it belonged to the Duchess and he would give it to her. Ethan replied to His Highness that was fine. As they walked down the hall, Ethan realized he was wondering what that letter said. He looked carefully at the letter and thought about how Cecilia might react if he read it. Perhaps the girl would be angry with him, or perhaps she would laugh. However, he stopped and thought about how pathetic he was being. He realized that he couldn't do it, even out of curiosity because it was wrong. When he reached the Duchess's chambers, Ethan knocked on the door and opened it, calling his wife's name quietly. Ethan knocked on the door and opened it, calling his wife's name quietly. He sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at her, and realized that she must be tired. He did not believe that Cecilia was his wife. He thought about the fact that when he looked at Cecilia, it was like he was seeing someone else, because even her beautiful smile seemed different. Something had clearly changed about her. And Ethan is very curious about what exactly. He started to reach out his hand to the girl's hair, but stopped before he could touch it. He remembered her saying that trying to be good all the time could be harmful. When he took his hand away, he called her name aloud and told her that he would wait until she wanted to open her heart to him. The next day, Cecilia opened the Empress's letter and read it. The letter from the Empress apologized for the incident, saying that she just wanted to wish them a happy marriage and asked her to send her congratulations to the Duchess's father. Cecilia was surprised that this was all, for she thought there would be something important. She made up her mind that she would just throw it out then. But suddenly the girl stopped. Here a very important question came to her. Why the Empress had written about her father, how she knew Cecilia's father at all. The girl had never noticed the Empress talking to her father in that life. She assumed that maybe they were just family friends, but she was the Empress and he was her father. Cecilia's marriage to Ethan would only make their relationship more awkward. The girl really didn't understand why the Empress was sending congratulations to her father. She hesitated for a moment. Suddenly the Duchess was summoned by Mrs. Monty, announcing that Miss Elena Nova should be arriving shortly. Cecilia turned to Mrs. Monty, saying that she was just in time, and asked the woman if she had noticed her father keeping in touch with anyone else. Mrs. Montes hesitated and replied that she did not know, for she only serves Her Highness. Besides, the head butler is in charge of all the mail. Cecilia folded her arms across her chest and mentally remarked that she hoped she need not worry about the letter. The Duchess was about to ask Mrs. Monty something about the head butler, but Miss Elena Nova appeared, knocking first and greeting Her Highness a moment later. She bowed, introducing herself as Elena Nova, and added that she was honored to meet the Duchess, Count Nova's daughter Elena Nova. The girl glowed, saying that she was very happy to help her, and her father said that it was an honor for their family to serve the Lane family. Cecilia remarked that it was very nice of him to say that, and she was also very pleased to meet Elena. Elena stated that she was willing to do anything for the Duchess, after which she laughed lightly. Cecilia thanked her, saying that there wasn't much to do. Elena would mostly be working on invitations and letters like the other maids. Elena stopped smiling, and in her head she spoke the Duchess's words that she would be like the other maids. Cecilia mentally thought about what she assumed was not what Elena had expected. She was sure that the girl had not expected to have to do such a simple job. It was good that Cecilia had called her now, because the Elena she had known in her past life had been quite cunning. But now she was just a child, unable to hide her feelings, and now Cecilia would have a much easier time dealing with her. Elena squeezed the shoulder of her hand with all her might. The next moment Cecilia added that she wanted Elena to start with something small. Perhaps later she would do the bookkeeping, for the Duchess herself was not very good with numbers. She also added that she had heard that Elena was very smart. The girl was overjoyed by these words, and she glowed. Elena told the Duchess that it was not the first time she heard that, also saying that she would do her best, and the Duchess would definitely not be disappointed. As they left the room, Cecilia said that Elena could rest for now. She thanked her and said they would see each other tomorrow. Suddenly, someone called the Duchess by name. It was Ethan. He approached his company of girls. His Highness said he hoped they could have dinner together, and noticed the girl next to him, making a guess as to who she was. But Cecilia beat him to it by introducing Miss Elena Nova as her personal assistant now. She also reminded him that she had mentioned it to her husband. Ethan accepted this and greeted Elena, saying it was a pleasure to meet her. Elena coughed and embarrassedly replied to His Highness that he could address her simply as Elena. Mrs. Monta, standing behind her, was stunned by Elena's words. Cecilia looked at the girl and wondered if she could really be so naive. The Duchess herself had never seen her like this. Cecilia didn't think Elena was stupid enough to flirt with Ethan when his wife was around. Ethan, however, calmly tells Miss Elena Nova that they cannot address each other by name. Elena was surprised at his words and immediately apologized to His Highness. Cecilia continued to watch the girl in silence, noting that she was clearly ashamed but not discouraged, and there was so much greed and longing in her eyes. Cecilia remembered that Elena had tried to get Ethan in a previous life. She remembered sitting on her knees on the floor, watching Ethan and Elena pair off. Cecilia had been foolish in a past life and had let Elena take Ethan away from her, but she mentally declared that not this time. Cecilia grabbed her husband under the elbow and coquettishly asked her husband if they could let Miss Nova rest. Ethan replied that of course they could. Mrs. Monty also stated that she would go. Elena began to tremble with anger. She clenched her hands into a fist. The next moment, we see the clinking of wine glasses. Ethan and Cecilia are sitting on the bed. The girl shares with her husband that she seems to have eaten too much, And Ethan laughs in response and replies that the fish was indeed very tasty. Cecilia remembered something and told her husband that she had received an invitation from the Marquis of Caliber and asked her husband if he remembered it, because they had promised. Ethan wondered if Sienna would be there, because they had a lot to talk about. Cecilia replied that of course she would be, since it was their first meeting after the wedding. Ethan also remembered something and shared with Cecilia that Enan had made a list of books about Ronner Island, after which he immediately asked his wife if he could buy them all. The girl hesitated and asked if she could look at them first, for she thought it would be better if they gave her the list. Ethan replied that of course, after which he sincerely shared that he enjoyed being around Cecilia and asked her if he could stay longer. Cecilia confidently told him that he didn't need to ask that because she was his wife. At that moment, she called him by name, and then realized that it was a terrible mistake. She had completely forgotten that it wasn't a past life when she called his name. She remembered their happy moments from a past life again. Ethan addressed the girl by name and took her hand. Cecilia started to excuse herself and addressed him as His Highness. But he said her name again and, holding her hand, asked her seriously and hopefully if she liked him. Cecilia hesitated at first, but then replied that of course she liked him. Ethan smiled sincerely at her words and said that he would do anything to make her happy. She remembered that he had constantly looked at her only as a wife of convenience. She wondered if he even wanted her, if he loved her at all. The girl remembered from her past life the gloatingly smiling Alina building next to Ethan. If that were true, if he really loved her, things would be different. Cecilia felt as if she were falling from that tower again. She remembered the way he smiled and called her name, the way he looked at her. She told herself not to believe those eyes. Cecilia remembered Mrs. Monty's words that when it came to men, she should play hard to get. Cecilia then replied to Miss Monta that he was different, but the woman replied that the girl was simply too young to understand, and he just seemed that way to her now. Cecilia had then confidently declared that she was an adult. But now the girl understood that Mrs. Monte was right then, and the girl still kept her distance with him. However, Cecilia hugged His Highness, declaring that she had always loved him. Mentally, however, she stated that she wanted Ethan to be dependent on her in this life, to hurt him mercilessly, just as she had suffered because of him. Ethan hugged her back. The following day came, and somebody alerted Ethan and Cecilia that Marquis and Marquise Caliber had arrived. Ethan and Cecilia greeted them with a smile, and the Duke himself greeted them. Marquis Caliber is the princess's aide, and Marquise Caliber, Ethan's cousin, is Sienna Caliber. The girl asked to be called just Sienna, and afterward she remarked that the newly married couple looked very cute. Ethan asked his cousin not to embarrass them. Suddenly, Sienna noticed a girl standing nearby and asked Cecilia who she was, for she had not seen her before. The Duchess introduced her as the new maid, Miss Elena Nova. Elena at this point sweetly tucked her hair behind her ear. Cecilia immediately noticed that Elena is a very smart girl, and she helps the Duchess with many things. The Marquise mentally wondered why this girl was dressed as if she were a lady in this house. It clearly made her wary. She asked Cecilia if Nova was really their maid. The Duchess smilingly replied that she was simply repaying her loyalty to the Lane family. Sienna said she understood, but also added that if they needed maids, she had the girls and would do anything to get the job. In the next moment, Sienna was already whispering to the Duchess that if they wanted to remove this girl, she could do it right now. Cecilia laughed and said she didn't have to. Elena looked at them and thought that it was very rude to whisper near her. Glowing, Elena said that she was pleased to meet the Marquis Caliber. Cecilia added that since the girl had not yet met many in the capital, she was sure Sienna would help her. The next moment, the Marquis had Cecilia in her arms and turned to Elena and told her how lucky she was to be serving such a wonderful lady. Elena was clearly uncomfortable, but she agreed with her words out loud and mentally wondered what this Marquise Sienna had just said. Cecilia turned to Sienna, saying that she understood that she cared, but honestly she felt indebted to Elena. After all, it was because of Elena's intelligence that the Duchess was able to solve the problem related to workers' compensation. Therefore, Cecilia feels guilty that such a smart girl doing such simple errands After all, because Cecilia is not good with numbers, she corrects her mistakes. The Marquise hugged the girl, saying that this is nonsense. She stated that Cecilia has just become part of their family, so she will still learn everything. Sienna also asked her not to worry about household chores and just enjoy her time with her husband. In the next moment, Sienna's frown settled on Alina and collided with her confused one, whereupon the Marquise told Cecilia aloud that bragging and intelligence were different things, and she should not let anyone think she wasn't good enough. These words dumbfounded and hurt Alina. She began to shake with anger. The Marquise went on to say that she had met tons of girls like Alina. Alina, meanwhile, continued to shake with anger and mentally wondered if Sienna really thought the girl was interfering, and how dare she even. Suddenly, Alina shouted out loud, saying that Marquise Caliber was deluded, but Sienna immediately put the girl in her place in a chilling voice, saying that Miss Nova shouldn't interrupt other people. Her gaze fixed on Alina expressed utter contempt. Miss Nova was clearly frustrated. She clenched her jaw and hands into a fist, and her entire face reddened with anger. Night has fallen, and we see Alina brushing the Duchess's hair. It is already dark outside. Suddenly, Cecilia starts the conversation first, turning to Alina and telling her not to think about what Sienna said today. The Duchess likes the girl and believes her. Alina immediately glowed and thanked Her Highness, adding that she was fine. Cecilia moved on to a more serious topic, saying that Ethan's birthday was coming up. There would be a banquet, so they would need to work on the invitations. A radiant Alina replied to Her Highness that everything would of course be done. Cecilia thanked the girl. She also added that tomorrow was her and Ethan's day off, so she would go to bed early and Alina could go. As Alina left the Duchess's chambers and headed down the hall, she thought about how Cecilia could neglect such an important event for just a day off. Doesn't the Duchess realize it's so stupid and naive? Alina thought confidently that then she would definitely not succeed in ruining her plans. The next moment, we see a carriage coming with Ethan and Cecilia in it. The coachman notifies them that they have arrived. Ethan got out of the carriage first and, holding out his hand to his wife, told her to hold on to his hand. The girl began to reach out her hand to his, and he added that it was his duty as a husband. Cecilia thought about him doing it again. She remembered how in a past life he had told her to hold his hand so she wouldn't trip. Cecilia realized that she shouldn't fall for his kindness, but she couldn't. Walking down the street, Ethan remarked that it was great that they were out. Cecilia remarked that it was a nice day. While the girl wondered aloud if the bookstore was on the next block, Ethan noticed something outside the storefront window where they had stopped and called out to Cecilia and asked her to look at it. The girl noticed that it was a jewelry store. Ethan began to ask his wife what she thought about the necklace or the hat. They were beautiful, and this boutique itself was known for its beautiful collection. The girl awkwardly replied that they were beautiful, but they needed to go to the bookstore. Ethan suggested they just look a little. They are on a date after all, so they can have fun. Cecilia was a little puzzled by his words about the date. Ethan started pushing the girl inside. When they entered the store, they were greeted by a man in their store and also asked how he could help. Ethan shared with the man that he was looking for something special for Duchess. Cecilia was still puzzled, asking His Highness why. Ethan smilingly replied to let the girl do what he had to do. A male employee brought out some jewelry on a pillow, saying they had just received it. The large, teardrop-shaped stone is accented with rows of small pearls. This piece of jewelry is called a mermaid's tear, and it is the only piece of this quality. The staff member also added that the pearl suits Her Highness very well, and then asked if she would like to try it on. The girl started to resist, but Ethan himself took the jewelry, and saying that he thought it would fit Cecilia very well, asked her to try it on, and brought it close to her neck. The girl took his hand, saying she couldn't. Ethan asked her why she said that, because the jewelry would suit her very well. Ethan did help her put the jewelry around her neck. She was complimented on how lovely she looked. The staff member brightened up and added that it was as if the necklace had been made especially for Her Highness. Ethan also added that he really liked it, and she should take it. He would pay for everything. The girl replied that it was too expensive and she still had unwrapped gifts from the wedding. Ethan remarked that he liked to please his wife. The embarrassed couple holding hands walked on. The next moment we see them in the library. Standing by the shelves, Cecilia remarked that Inan's list was very helpful. Ethan asked his wife not to hurry. He thought that the history books were in this department. The girl thanked His Highness and then took one book and opened it, noting that there was so much there. She added that following Inan's notes, there was no research on the author in this book. However, she would still take it and compare it to the other books. Ethan silently watched the girl by the racks and thought about the fact that he didn't know she could be like this. He also can't say he knows her well. It's hard for him to say it all, and right now the girl is different in some way. He thinks, but no sooner had he finished the thought than something caught his attention. He noticed something on the girl's dress, probably got on her dress somewhere else. Ethan reached out and touched the girl, but she froze and was frightened. Ethan was embarrassed and apologizing, asked if he had scared her, while noting that something was on her dress. Cecilia replied that it was all right. She was just engrossed in her books. She asked him not to worry. Ethan thought that of course the girl could be scared, because she was completely engrossed in the books. There was nothing wrong with that. He didn't need to be upset. Turning in the other direction, Cecilia said that she would go on looking for the books on the list, so they would meet later. Watching the departing girl trail off, he realized he didn't want her to leave him.